Hi everyone, welcome back to Hot Seat with Penzola. Thank you so much. We are still in season 3, and today I am talking to Dr. Bongi Mbatha, and she is a developmental pediatrician. And today's topic is really to focus on ADD and ADHD. And I think this is something that we probably don't understand because it manifests itself in different ways in different children. And I really thought that it is prudent for us to have a professional to talk to us about that so that we can just unpack the subject a little bit. Doctor, welcome to Hot Seats with Penzola. Thank you so much for coming to chat to us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here.
The subject of ADD and ADHD is one that's really close to my heart. And because I'm a mother as well, and it's important that I understand, what my children are going through. And and that's really why I think, let me speak to somebody, because the other parents that I speak to, their experience is different.
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying that we'll have all the answers today, but it is really just to start the conversation so that where do we go to find information? And some of the parents I speak to still don't know. So yeah, let's get right into it, right?
Right.
Let's start by what is ADD? What is ADHD?
Okay, so ADD is attention deficit disorder.
Right.
And ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
Ah.
But essentially, they're the same thing.
Okay.
So the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, I think in 2013, decided that ADD, ADHD, it's one thing.
It's one thing.
So it's like a spectrum.
A spectrum.
Because ADD talks about just the attention deficit, whereas ADHD it's attention and hyperactivity.
Okay.
So now we refer to it as ADHD.
Right.
Yeah, so
okay.
it's a spectrum.
Okay.
And the reason we say that, so it's deficits in attention, number one, and the second part is deficits either in hyperactivity or impulsivity. So your child either has inattention or they have hyperactivity and impulsivity. They can also have both.
I was about to ask, can they have both?
Yes, they can have both. So they're either predominantly inattentive or predominantly hyperactive,
and
or they have
impulsive.
both. Yeah,
okay.
Or they have both.
Yeah.
And there are certain symptoms that we look for under each in terms of diagnosing it. So when you're looking at the inattention, everyone can tell the inattentive child. They make careless mistakes. They're not watching where they're going. They're spilling. They're forgetful.
Yeah.
Like they're not paying attention. It's like when you speak to them, you've got to say things more than once.
Exactly.
Yeah. Or they'll walk. You've told them to do something.
And then they come back and say, "What did you say I was here again?"
Exactly. They weren't paying attention. They've got so many things going on in their mind.
Yeah.
And in the hyperactive or impulsive child, that's the one that everyone can identify. I mean, that's the child who can't sit still when we're supposed to be sitting still.
Correct.
The child will blurt out an answer even before the
teacher. They won't go unnoticed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like they're driven by motor. Everything is fast and hyperactive. They struggle with impulse control. So it's common in both girls and boys. Just we don't identify it as commonly in the girls because the girls present a little differently to the boys. They can be the daydreamers, the inattentive, but you do get girls who are hyperactive as well.
Yeah.
So it's a spectrum. You'll get your child who has either the one or both or just the other one.
Yeah.
And each child is different. And it's just a different way of how the brain works.
Yeah.
So there are neurotransmitters in the brain, dopamine and noradrenaline, that are deficit, like kind of low. Dopamine helps you with your reward system and your organizational kind of skills. And then with noradrenaline, that's the one that focuses on your focus or your attention.
Yeah.
So you're kind of missing. It's a proper brain disorder in that there are neurotransmitters that you don't have enough.
So this is not something. So this is a proper illness, that if I can call it that. So if that's the case, then why is it not considered a medical condition?
It is considered a medical condition. It's a neurodevelopmental condition.
And the reason I say this is because you know, things like medical aid don't cover it. You know, they because especially with the basic medical aid schemes, right?
Yeah.
There's a list that they put together, which they say is, I don't know what they call it, but these are things that are common. These are things that are considered to be a medical condition that we cover. Now, with ADD and ADHD, as far as medication is concerned, so I mean, it sounds to me like it's a proper medical condition, but medical aid does not cover it. So is it a case where they're just refusing? Well, it's an opinion, I guess. It's not a fact that you're going to say. So how are we not making that transition so that the medical insurance actually sees it as exactly that it is a medical condition?
So it is a medical condition, definitely, but unlike diabetes, for example, where I can kind of do a blood test.
Correct.
And then I can say, okay, you have
For sure,
diabetes,
yes.
you don't have insulin, we need to give you insulin. With ADHD and some neurodevelopmental disorders, there is no bio
or
test
tangible
that I can do and say, you know. This is a behavioral kind of thing where we're observing behaviors that the child will do, and it has to be that the child is not just hyperactive or inattentive in one environment. They have to be in quite a lot of environments, either at school, at home.
But that methodology,
church.
Doctor,
Yes.
Is that not proof enough to submit as something tangible? Because we have assessment tools that we're using to assess the behavior. You know, just like the study of psychology, which has got some aspects of behavior, right? So we are using certain tools to test this child in the work, in the home environment, but also in the school environment.
Yes.
So there's enough evidence that tells us that this particular child has an issue, and you know, and this is what we're classifying it as. You know, therefore the Ritalin, Contramil, Concerta must be paid.
Yeah.
It's by the medical aid because it's a chronic illness. It's not.
It's
a chronic illness. In order for the child to fit into the school environment and concentrate, you need tablets.
To make certain changes to the environment. Whether you're doing behavioral therapy or you're doing medication, you have to. So I think it's platforms like these that are important, so that we can raise awareness and people can actually realize that this is a medical condition that needs to be covered. And the medication is not cheap. It's not cheap.
No, it's not
at all. And I know that we went into medication so early on, there are other ways of trying to manage it, and medication is like the primary, but there are behavioral therapies that you can do as well that assist. But I think it's platforms like these that are important to raise awareness.
So I mean, I mentioned to you that this is a subject that's really close to me, to my heart, right? So I've sort of been in that journey where I've really tried different therapies, and you get advice from everybody around you, you know, community, mother, you know, sisters or friends or other mothers. You know, medication is not good because it will damage the child. You know, they can't be dependent on medication. And the one thing that I heard mostly that was coming through was the child will be prone to being an addict, you know, in the future. And then others are saying you must try organic or, you know, natural homeopath, what. The others we tried some therapy, and I just forgot what it's called, and I'm sure you'd know, where they taught us. We used to do these exercises daily for 30 minutes. Vestibular something. Yeah, and there were certain exercises that we had to do to kind of re-engineer the brain. That's what I was told, right? And because I was told, firstly because of the cesarean that I had, you know, when the child is ready to be born, they tell you there's movements that I'm ready to come out, but cesarean, you know,
takes you out just before.
I'm done. Can you know? So as a result, that kind of causes some half development of something, and then also where the child sits and they're supposed to crawl, you know, they don't crawl. They sit and they just stand up and
start
run
walking,
and
yeah.
start walking. So the missed crawling stage is also considered to be something that, I don't know, somehow in the brain, there's a disconnect which causes that. So, and that's just the information. But
Yes.
now we are here. There was a cesarean, there was no crawling. Now we are here. Great stuff. I understand why we're here. As parents, you know, do you then suggest we go second opinion? You know, they try it because, and it's also costly.
It's very costly.
Yeah. So what is your, so if I come to you with my child and you do the necessary assessments, and this is what, what is the conversation you're going to have with me as a parent?
Okay, so firstly, I'm going to explain what ADHD is. And even though I've defined it in the beginning, it has to have started before the age of 12 years. So you will have seen all these symptoms in this child before the age of 12 years. So you do get people who are diagnosed much later on in life, but you have to have said, did this start before the age of 12 years? And then it has to cause impairment in your daily functioning. Right. So whether it be at school, at home, church, sports, everyone is complaining that, no, you can't sit down, you're forgetful, you lose things.
And there's social awkwardness, right? Is the social...
So there's some comorbidities, which are other conditions that can be associated with ADHD. But just going back to what I would say to a mother, like you, for example, is explain that and then say that it is not due to other conditions. So there are other conditions that may mimic ADHD, right? So we have to exclude those. Okay. And then once we've done that, then I would go and tell you about the causes. So as you've mentioned, cesarean section, not crawling, all of that. Unfortunately, we don't exactly know 100% the cause of that ADHD, right? So it can be genetic and environmental. So there's certain genetic factors and environmental factors that when combined have that perfect condition of then the child manifesting as ADHD. There are other risk factors as well. So the risk factors, it's not necessarily cesarean section, no, but if your child was premature, so if they came before time. So I understand why people think now having a seizure because I've taken you out of your womb before the time, but we're talking more the extreme premature babies, the low birth weights, the ones who spent a long time in ICU. Other things would be smoking in the mother. So with the smoking, we're not 100% sure whether it's the smoking
while you're pregnant or having smoked in general.
So it's probably while you're pregnant, but are you smoking because you now have your own ADHD that you're smoking, and then because there's genetic factors, you've passed on the gene to your child, or does the actual smoke that you're smoking result in ADHD? But we know that mothers
the smoking has an element.
Yes, and then other substance abuse, alcohol, you'll get your child who has ADHD.
So let me come in there, like, so, and I'm, like I said, so I personally was born at 7 months.
Ah, okay. Yes, so there's a risk factor. Right? Yes.
So that speaks to the premature.
Yeah, the premature.
Right? And I remember when I had my son, it was a case where before my son, and my mom, always used to say to me, because at school I was very clever, and I got those things that says it's a number 1, number 2 across all the standard and stuff. So I always used to take number 1.
Most ADHD kids are very smart.
The teacher would say to my mom, "Wana how uthalifile mara yo."
Yes.
She doesn't sit still. She's always disturbing other kids. I'm always saying to the teacher, "You told us this yesterday. Like, can we move on to the next thing?"
That's the thing with ADHD kids. They're really, really smart. They learn slightly differently to the way other people learn. Most of them have high IQ.
So could I have then passed it on to
my son? That's
where
the genetics come in. And certain genes have been identified to be associated with ADHD.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not yet, we're not there yet where we're doing precision
But are we
medicine.
spending enough money on the research for ADHD and ADD? Because for me, it's increasingly, I'm finding more and more conversations amongst parents.
Yeah.
And purely because there's not enough schools to accommodate the learning style of the kids. A lot of the schools at mainstream that we've got are quite assessment driven, heavily so, and do not accommodate the
So
the itchy feet.
in terms of research, I think there is a lot of research that's being done, but unfortunately with research in the medical field, where is it happening? Outside of Africa. It's not happening here. We may have a few centers.
Is it because of money that it's not happening here?
Yeah, it's probably money related, and also the drugs are expensive. So there is research happening, but in terms of the schooling system, I don't think all ADHD kids need to be in specialized schools. They may need a different kind of style of teaching. They are more the visual and tactile learners, meaning they're not auditory learners. So, and the teachers, they stand in front of a classroom and they talk.
Yes.
And if your child is not an auditory learner, they're not going to be focused on that, but they're visual learners. You'll find some ADHD kids, they draw very well. They can put puzzles together. They enjoy using their hands. So if you, when you're teaching maths, can put actual things in front of them and not just be on the board, make it fun, interactive. You know, there are accommodations that can be made. And then if you have your ADHD in terms of behavioral therapies in the classroom, you can also have 5-minute breaks. Let's move, jump around, get rid of that energy, and then go back, focus for a few minutes, and then jump around again, you know? So there are small things that can be done. And yes, our mainstream schools don't accommodate these kids. One, they've got too many kids in the classroom. And ADHD kids fare better in small-sized classrooms, maybe even one-on-one. So it is difficult. I find our schooling system does not accommodate these kids who are, I'm going to use the word neurodiverse. Meaning,
I like that. Because there's nothing wrong with kids that have ADHD or ADD.
There actually is no normal brain. You know, there's a spectrum. We are all on the spectrum.
But obviously the spectrum that we as a society have normalized to be the right spectrum, is now taking precedence to make us believe that it's the right one. So, you know, my son says to me he likes a school because he can do his mathematics times or whatever he calls it while he's on a trampoline. You know, and
if that works for him, imagine if he had a teacher who said, you know what, when you're doing maths, let's go jump on the trampoline.
Now let's bring it home a little bit around the socio-economic issues that we've got in this country, right? So whilst I can afford, as Penny, as you, as anybody else can afford to take your child to a educational psychologist to assess and buy the certain medication and get a small school where there's 6 or 12 of them in class. We understand that the majority and the demographics of this country are in such a way that bulk of those kids can't afford to do that. You work at Baragwanath Hospital.
Yes, I work at Parental.
What are the challenges that you're seeing and what are the parents saying to you?
So number one, there aren't a lot of developmental pediatricians in South Africa, even in Gauteng.
Wow.
So number one is our waiting list is about 9 to 12 months. So if you want to come and see me,
I have to wait
you've
9
been
to 12 months.
referred, it'll probably be a 9 to 12 month wait. And that's because at my clinic, there's only about 2 of us, and then there's Jobak Jen and Rahima Musa who do these assessments. And on a typical day at a clinic, we'll see about 27 kids, but about 4 of them will be new patients. To see a new patient also does not take 30 minutes. It takes a good hour and a half
because you've got to do a proper
to do the
assessment.
full assessment. So that's number one, is there are not enough of us to be making this diagnosis. When we do make the diagnosis, we only really have access to very limited number of medications in the public sector, right? So it's the methylphenidate, which is the Ritalin, and even then they may use generic names, that's fine, but and then probably Risperdal, which is not really, but we use it. And then in private, you have more access to medications, stimulants, non-stimulants, and it's nice because it depends on how your child reacts to the medication. Yeah.
So there's not, I mean, in the private sector, there's enough options where we assess whether the medication works and
yes,
you keep changing.
And you keep changing
so
until you find the right one.
In the public sector, you've got limited. So if none of those work, do you then stop the child the medication, or does the child continue with that medication?
So far we haven't had where such a case where it doesn't work. The one thing about methylphenidate has got a very good efficacy, meaning it works really well when it's for the right reason, when you're giving it for the right reason. So we give efficacies to medications on a scale of 0 to 1, and Ritalin or methylphenidate is actually at 0.9, meaning it's got a 90% effectiveness when you're prescribing it for the right reason.
So I want to go back. I know we probably touched on it. I want us to go back. So let's break down some of the common symptoms for parents to start looking at and maybe noticing to their kids, and then also talk about other therapies and other ways within the home environment that you can use to manage. Because if you're going to wait 9 months in the system, how else do you help your child?
How else do you help your child? Very good question. So it's usually, I don't know whether it's us, but parents, I'll talk African parents, don't pick up the ADHD that much themselves. You know, they'll make excuses. This
like
one
our
is like, you know,
nobody paid attention to say maybe. Or malume.
Yes, we make excuses, and then what do?
Some shy.
We give beatings, we give punishments. So usually the kids are picked up at school, where the teacher's the one who says, there's something here. This child is clever, but they're not performing
at their full potential.
Like, I know this child knows this thing, but every time they get the test, it's not quite there, or they're just hyper. So it's usually the teachers, and then you'll get the referral that comes to us. But in terms of what the parents can do and what the symptoms are, so we've mentioned
outside of the resistance for us to accept this thing, because it's the biggest thing. So outside of that, what do we look out for?
Okay, so it's inattention. Meaning this child really struggles to focus. Their concentration, they start one thing, they leave it, they go on to the next, they start the next. And then the mom is like, what's happening here? You've left things all over the show. Oh yes, I'm going to go back and finish that. It's the child who loses things that are necessary for a task. So you've lost your books. How do you lose your books when you're supposed to
that's
homework?
Like a core thing.
Yes, you came home from school, no shoes. How? You know, it's the kid who's playing, leaves the shoe here, continues, goes home, Jersey, every week something's missing.
I lost a pair of school shoes twice when I was in primary school.
So
I'm
it's
just laughing because what you're saying really makes sense.
So they're losing the things that are important for doing a task. They're forgetful. And not because they have problems with their memory, but because they started one thing. So you said, take this plate to the kitchen, for example. Take a plate. They go, they hear some music, they leave the plate in the lounge. And now they're there with the music. The brother asks them something. They're off with the brother. And you in the kitchen are like, where's the plate? And now he's also like, where did I put the plate? You know, they can't even backtrack to go and find where the plate was. So they forget things like that. And then the other ones are the hyperactivity symptoms. So the hyperactivity, this child can't sit down, especially when they need to sit down. Like in church, while the priest is preaching, they're that kid who just gets up and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to the bathroom. You know, like they just can't. They're fidgeting all the time, constantly moving. The parents even say it's almost like this child is driven by a motor. You know, they're just always busy. And then it's also the child who talks. doesn't stop, butts into conversations, and when they start, they can veer off into a different conversation, and you also struggle to kind of follow what they're saying. But it's those busy kids, the kids who are impulsive. You know, they'll run into a wall because I'm running so fast, looking where I'm going, so they'll get hurt. They do things without thinking, and even if you tell them again and again, it's difficult for this child, and they're not doing it on purpose. It literally is, they struggle with impulse control. They struggle with time management. You know, you'll say to them, go get ready. 15 minutes, we're going to school in the morning. What's happening? You'll get there, the one sock is on, they're watching TV. The next thing, you're just like, so you've got to put timers at home to say 15 minutes. When I say 15 minutes, it's 15 minutes. Come back, 5 more minutes. Remind them. They need constant reminders, and because they're visual, you've got to put the schedules. Schedule. On Monday afternoon when you get back from school, 1, take off your uniform, and you take off your uniform. Next,
to that detail.
Have something to eat. Next. And then you can ask, did you do one? Did you? Oh, yes, I forgot. I need to go and do 2. You know, that's how you've got to now organize and structure. And then it's constant reminder and having routines and schedules and trying, because they struggle with keeping time, being organized, focusing. You've got to do it on an outside level for them so that they can focus, they can be able to achieve.
Is that what then the parent, like I said, the parent that obviously is can't afford the medication or is on a waiting list, those are so putting a very strict routine is one of the things that the parent needs to do.
Hitting them physically will not work. So resorting to violence.
What about screaming? Because I find a lot of parents are screaming at these kids.
They're not listening. They're not auditory. They're not listening. You'll say it many times. In fact, they just switch off. And then when you've calmed down, it's like, oh yeah, okay, mom was shouting. And I'm sorry, ma, I won't do it again. Tomorrow, I did it again. Sorry, ma. You know. They're not doing it
on purpose.
It's literally impulse control.
Are there any sports that you think, or that you believe, or that the research tells us that is can help deal with this?
So I think it depends on the individual child, because remember, the inattentive child might not be that hyper active, so they might not be sporty. So it depends on your child, but any release of the energy, you know, let them go outside before they start homework. Get them to run around a little bit, then you bring them inside. And then the other thing that works is rewards. You know, giving them a reward, and the reward needs to be something that's almost immediate, not kind of end of the year. I'll get you an iPhone if you
make your bed
by tomorrow.
Is
forgotten about if you make your bed now, if you do your homework now, then you can get 10 minutes of TV. Watch TV timer, you know, and then you'll like, okay, let's check. It's done. You know, you've got to put some systems in place just to assist them. So those are the behavioral therapies. And there are training programs that are available for the parents as well, that are available for the kids. It's difficult for us in the public sector. So we actually literally sit there with the mothers and we give them some sort of behavioral modifications that they can do. And usually when we're giving these behavioral modifications, the parents will say, Ish, I think I also have ADHD. You know, I hear you talking here, you're telling me all this, I'm going to get home and I'm going to forget all of it. But we usually diagnose it in the parents when we're diagnosing the child, and that just shows you the strong genetic correlation that
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's essentially the adult, what we refer to as adult ADHD or adult ADD is probably something that started.
It's probably started from a young
age. And then would you say that, I mean, based on what you're saying, I can assure you, I can confirm for you that I'm definitely ADHD.
I'm sure
right?
you did all the
I've took the questionnaire already. And as an adult, I try to be conscious and reminding myself to say, this is what we're doing. And then when I do a task to sit and finish, it's very difficult. But I think as an adult, I'm now forced to finish the task. And I find that, I remember submitting an assignment for school an hour before we had to leave for Cape Town. I knew that the holiday was coming, and it was going to be a lit holiday.
Yes.
It's your own little and I woke up that day at 6 in the morning while my husband was getting ready and then packing the bags. I woke up and I went to the study and I did the assignment and I submitted it.
You had it work.
And can I tell you, I got 80% for that assignment. And I was saying to my husband, had I sat down properly, did this assignment, I could have nailed it. Yeah. And as a result of spending that time doing the assignment, because Cape Town young pizza, I need to go. There were no socks in the bag, because remember I packed the bags. Now he has to pack the bag. There were no socks, there were no belts, there were no pajamas in the bag.
So all of that.
So I'm still functional, but I need help.
Yes,
I need to manage this help. So how, and it is quite expensive, and one that doesn't afford. I'm just, if I can't afford the Contramil and the Concerta or the Ritalin as an adult, as a parent, obviously, and you've said, put a routine, strict, don't draw boundaries, and maybe that kind of helps. So as an adult, what are the things I need to put in place?
So those are signs of adult ADHD. But the fact that you've made it so far in your adult life and are successful means that it's kind of manageable. So what happens with, ADHD, as I said, is a spectrum, can be mild, can be moderate, can be severe. What happens with untreated ADHD? If you don't treat ADHD, what's going to happen to that child? So that child, when they reach teenage years, one, they probably will have failed a grade, or they're not performing to their potential. They're just kind of passing. It's frustrating the parents.
Just getting through.
Yeah, they are more prone to substance abuse, and it's almost a way of self-medicating. They kind of feel better when they're taking the substances because it's bringing them down. They can think clearer,
because it can get overwhelming with everything that needs to be done.
Yeah. So they'll become the kids who indulge and land up with teenage pregnancies. They drop out of school. They struggle to keep jobs as adults. They jump from job to job because you're not meeting deadlines. You can't do this. You don't get along with people. There's interpersonal clashes. Yeah, so they really struggle at life, but they keep asking themselves, but I know I'm not stupid. I know this. Why can't I just do this thing? They lose the things that are important. And then they may land up in a life of crime or behind bars. So if it's untreated, it can get really bad. But with the treated ADHD, and you did ask me this before about addiction, with kids who are treated, they have been proven in studies that they are less likely to become substance abusers or addicts when they're on the medication. And the way the medication works, let's talk about just the stimulants. And that's the worry about parents, is that we're treating ADHD with a stimulant, and all they know about stimulants is cocaine, kagwale, causes a euphoria, and this is a similar kind of medication.
If I know a certain type of a high.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yes, exactly. Yeah. But this is obviously a controlled, calculated dose that is released very slowly into the body. Whereas with the stimulants that are abused, or the illicit stimulants,
it dumps all of it immediately.
Yeah, they take a lot, they get in there, they get the euphoria. It's a fast release of all those neurotransmitters. So with the medication, it's a very slow release. And in terms of abuse of the medication, you would literally have to take the whole month's supply
for you to actually
crush it and only get like a
small high,
2-second high. So the amount that you're treating with is not even worth
that
that
risk
high.
That risk that is being highlighted is essentially sort of a myth.
Yeah. So it's yeah, they've looked at studies less likely to occur. It's the ones who don't get treated that then would result in the substance abuse.
So earlier on you mentioned the 9 months waiting period and the referral. So who's referring them to you?
Okay. So to get into the government system, as usual, you have to go start at the clinic, your local clinic, with either a letter from school, because that's where, or you can say, my child is very busy. They can't focus, they will write a letter. Yes, no, they do. We're trying slowly, and now that they know the service is available in the public hospitals, they are referring, which is now why our referral letters are this big. But we do go through the referral letters and sift order of importance.
And how do you determine that?
So in terms of order of importance, sometimes they've already had a screening sheet, that questionnaire that gets done with the ADHD ticks, and then they'll say this child is already in grade 2, and they've put in a school report as well, and we're like, this child's already in school. We need to see this kid soon so that we can then see how we help the kids. The younger ones as well, we like to get them help so that you can help the parents with the behavioral modification so that you don't have to start medication immediately. Also, in terms of the medication, it's actually only been FDA approved for use in older than 6 years. So with that approval, because they've done studies in children from the age of 6
and it's safe
up, it's safe. If you're going to use it in children less than 6, then you're taking the risks. Those studies, they don't know how it's used. We may use it in a child who's like 5.5,
because they're closer to
to that 6, and if their weight is kind of an okay weight, they're not an underweight kid, because they do have side effects. Like all medication, they have side effects, and the side effects would be appetite suppressant. So if you're taking the stimulants, you're not going to want to eat when that stimulant is in your body.
That was also what I've noticed.
So yeah, it's usually, though, it depends on which one you're taking. But if you're taking the short acting, it's in your body. You're not going to eat for the hours that it's in the body. So you get different types. One lasts for about 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours, another 6 to 8 hours. You get one that lasts 12 hours, and some that can last 24 hours. So you've got to make sure the child has had a good breakfast before, and then usually provide snacks. They won't want a big meal.
Yeah, they want
they want to nibble here and there. And then when it's out of the system, say in the afternoon, then they eat. They'll want to have something to eat, and you've got to prepare something for them to eat and encourage them to eat. Sometimes as well, when it wears off in the afternoon, they can complain of some abdominal pains, headaches. It's just because the medication is out of the system. But the newer long-acting ones, you don't get that effect, the dip. And you can take more than one in a day, depending on how long it lasts. So some kids will have one in the morning and one at like 11, 12-ish. And that's okay as well. We just don't, you shouldn't take them at night or before you go to sleep. It will keep you up.
It will keep you
will
awake,
not
Now,
sleep.
the question that I had is in terms of, so obviously, because mostly this impacts the child at school, and the child takes the medication to help them concentrate. On the weekend, where there is no school, there's no need to concentrate, and you want this child to eat, because now when he hasn't had the tablet Haji, is it then advisable that there's no need to concentrate? So we don't take the medication on the weekend.
Yeah, we take a medication. We call it medication holiday breaks. So
is that advisable? Is that something that is okay?
It depends on the child. So we'll monitor each child individually. Some kids who are eating, gaining weight, no problems. Mom says, I want it in the weekend. Otherwise, my house is upside down. This child, I won't even be able to go to the mall with this child or whatever. Okay. So they can continue on the weekends. Maybe during school holidays, you can take a break. Just see, and then start it a little bit before you go to school, so that you're in that rhythm already. But there are some who take it Monday to Friday, Parents don't give it on the weekend, and you start again Monday to Friday. Some teachers do complain that the Monday, it's as if it hasn't quite. So maybe the day before,
yes, you know, because it's not in the system.
Yeah. So, but with the short acting ones, it's we just don't advise it. But
you don't advise the break.
Yeah, long breaks, but you could take weekend breaks, especially for the kid who's not eating, who's not gaining weight appropriately, which is why we monitor the kids. We see them about 6 monthly, if we're concerned 3 monthly. Weight monitoring and height as well. They say that it can make you probably 1 or so centimeter shorter, which for me is like, which one's better?
Yeah, which one is better?
Yeah. So the height is not such a big thing unless maybe the sports they play or whatever.
Yeah, like
but they tend to do so much better on medication.
So you mentioned something around I forgot now what I wanted to ask you, and it was quite an important thing that you mentioned. Oh, you mentioned that the when the child is ADHD and it's treated, you know, from a schooling perspective, they usually are successful in a smaller class. Now, with our public schools, you know what the situation is there. There's 52 or 60 of them. And whilst the parent will go to the clinic and they'll be referred to you, you treat them and they take the medication. What is the status then? Will it be better? Or even with the medication, is the recommendation that the child must be at a school where there's less kids so that they get the attention that they require?
I so wish we could stipulate that. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to change schools, especially if there's no money at home. I mean, these are schools where either they're not paying school fees or it's a very small amount.
I mean, so even though you don't have obviously mandate to dictate what needs to happen, but so you're saying that there's still a disadvantage, even though they are on medication, so there's still a disadvantage when they're in that school where there's 60 of them in class.
But they do better. I mean, we see it in their school reports. We see it in the parents who come and just, thank you. Guess what my child got? We do try. Some of them, there are very few government schools that cater for ADHD kids. But as you can imagine, there's another waiting list.
Yeah, I mean, to try and get in that school and be admitted, that's a process.
Yeah, it's easier when they're going to start from like a grade 1
in that school
versus very difficult to kind of transfer them, and our Department of Education is inundated with letters, and they're the ones who do the placements. So we can write the letter with our recommendation and the diagnosis, and then the Department of Education will then do their assessment, and then they'll recommend a school, which is also not always the best. Parents really come back and they want to fight with us because this is not the right school for my child. I don't like the school. My child doesn't belong in the school, but I have no say in which school I can suggest schools, and that's what we do, but we have no say where the child goes to school. But we do fight for some kids where you realize, you can't put this child in this school. And sometimes we'll say, okay, keep your child in mainstream. Let's see how the marks do.
And are you finding that are parents accepting, you know, these things, these issues? Are we, you know, do you think there's a need for more and more education?
I think there's definitely a need for more and more education. But I know from the patients at the clinics, the parents are very happy. They're actually pro, and you know, they'll go out and start. They even have their own support groups. They exchange numbers. They've got WhatsApps that they communicate with, and we try to give them as much information as we can. And not all the kids with ADHD need special schools. Some of them just need that little bit of, and they do well, and that's all you want. You want your child to reach their best and their fullest potential. So that they can have a good chance at this life. We already started at disadvantage.
You know what I mean?
So I think it's good. And being scared of medication just is actually lack of knowledge. You know, if we talk about it, every pill you drink has got a side effect. every medication you have. We can sit and write long lists. And I'm not here pushing medication. No, because medication alone, yes, it'll work, but it's not going to give you the best and full potential in your child. You need to, one, have information. You need to understand your child. And you need to put systems in place to assist your child. So,
and you also need to be willing to participate in
their learning and everything.
In the learning and the different medication that you need to try. And I remember, you know, like you said, medication doesn't work for everyone in the same way. And the ability to just monitor, to say, no, but this one makes the child not want to talk to anyone, just sits in their room and they become emotional. Then you're like, no, let's change it. So it's, as a parent, it's exhausting.
It is very
exhausting because you're consistently trying to, are you okay? You're watching every move, you know, and so that when you know, like, it's a trial and error.
It is. It's a trial. It's a trial and error, and we'll usually start with the lowest dose and the shortest acting, and slowly try and build till we find the right one. I wish we had gene therapy where I could just say, "Oh, this one's going to work for you.
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
The one for you." But unfortunately, we don't, and it's very difficult for the parents. And some of them will say, Ritalin made my child worse. He was so emotional. He cried for 2 weeks.
Yeah, they cry.
You know,
no,
and
Ritalin is something.
Yeah, so it does, and it's not just Ritalin. It's actually methylphenidate as the stimulant, because there's different types. As much as we say Ritalin mustn't write to
brand,
us,
sorry,
and,
we're not saying anything
it's methylphenidate, which is
the ingredient.
The ingredient, So it can cause labile moods in the first kind of 2 weeks that you started. And there are others, the atomoxetine, so your strateras, they can also take a long time to work, unlike the methylphenidate. So with the strateras, they can take up to 6 weeks before you see an effect.
And I remember we went to see this one doctor, and then she mentioned something, you know, that there was a spectrum of autism that's closely related to ADHD and I mean, what's your take on that?
So there's not like a spectrum of autism that's related to ADHD. ADHD in the very young child can present like autism, and autism can present like ADHD in the very young child. So when we're assessing very young children, we have to kind of
be very careful
and see which one is it. ADHD, is it ASD? We've got to see them more often than the others. But there isn't like an ADHD that's autistic. These are two completely different conditions. But you can have autism and have ADHD as another
in one
comorbidity. So the child can have autism, and then they're also hyperactive and inattentive. So you need to deal with that. So you can have ADHD that has other comorbidities. So they can have anxiety, they can have depression, they can have learning disabilities. These are all the things that can come with ADHD. And when you make the diagnosis of ADHD, you try and rule out or see if the child doesn't have all of that.
And how difficult is it then to suggest medication when you find a case where there is ADHD and there's depression, and now there's medication for ADHD, medication for depression? You know, that concussion, what does it do?
It's tough. That's when we end up using more than one medication, which is not nice. But we also do try the behavioral therapies, referring to the psychologist, trying to deal with the family dynamics.
Correct.
I think with ADHD a lot, we deal with family dynamics. You've got to find out about who's in the house, marital status of parents, is there fighting, any sudden changes in the family. You've got to look at all these things, because all these environmental things affect the child. So
it's funny that you bring that in, because, you know, some of the conversations I have with the mothers, the way in which those questions are asked, you know, around the marital stage, you know, and even that at school, a lot of parents feel like they feel humiliated, and I don't think that it's the questions that are asked, it's the way it's asked. You know, it's like Ngarumana is in an abusive home. You know how what is the relationship? It's how they're gathering the information, and I think that's probably what causes the resistance from the parents to say, what
so
are you saying? Now it's my fault.
I don't discipline my child.
You know, and because the schooling system, unfortunately, is quite not patient with these kids.
Not at all. They want instant results.
Yeah, you know, and they want to keep their 99% pass rate. Yes. So if you are here, hey, you are going to affect the stats, you know. And I remember the one conversation I was having with the teacher, and I said to the teacher, so I'm aware of the condition. You know, my child is doing swimming. My child is doing Kung Fu, which is a sport that also just helps center, you know. I'm doing this other therapy, and I forgot what it's called, that exercise, training, whatever therapy that I was saying. So these are the 4 interventions. There's a clear routine at home, sleeping time, eating time. So these are all these interventions that we've put in place at home. Please explain to me what you've done as a teacher to address this situation. You know?
Does my child sit at the back? Do they sit at the front?
You understand?
Are they sitting with someone?
You understand? Yes. So when they say they don't understand, what assistance do you give? And I found that instead of that actually worked, because that changed the conversation completely.
To say I'm doing
because
my part.
Instead of me being defensive and saying, hey, I was clear to say, in the home environment, these are the interventions. So can we align with the school?
Yes.
Where are your interventions?
And that's someone talking from
and there were no interventions. Yeah, but Mrs. Manya, you know, I said, you know. So I think as parents, if we become more active and be clear around what we think should happen and how we're dealing with it at home versus, you know, because the school fees you pay is quite a lot. I cannot be stressed when that debit order comes through. I understand exactly. So because the teachers themselves are not ready to engage, and they're very impatient, and hence I'm saying, you know, and this is just in the private sector, but you know, in my experience, but I can only imagine what it's like in the public sector.
Lots of animosity, kids change schools a lot, it's a problem. But I think it's about building relationships. But also for us, when we make the diagnosis, I always tell the mothers, you've got to empower yourself. So I want you to go and learn as much as you can about ADHD. I give them books. And the books, they're available in Zulu, Sesotho, Setswana,
I was actually about to ask
English.
The barrier, the language barrier. So I'm glad you mentioned that they are available in all languages, so that it's easy to, you know, grasp the information.
So we try, but most will pick English because they'll say, this one is written, the Sotho is too deep, or the Zulu is too deep, which is something we need to work on as well, and try and make our translated books more accessible. But it's about empowering the mothers or the fathers or the aunts, uncles, gogos who bring these children, because they're the ones who need to go and represent and advocate for the child in the school, in the church, at the sports, you know, because some of the kids, it's when they're playing soccer, this child is unmanageable, and in church we can't have this child,
and they come back crying, the coach was shouting at them the whole time, like, hey, if you must listen.
So it's about empower yourself so that you can go and
be that advocate
for your child. Wow. You know, it's a big topic, but
it is, and I think, you know, probably, I mean, I could sit the whole day with you to chat about it, because it is a topic that is close to my heart, and I advocate for it, and I'm very open to playing my role, you know, in finding solutions, you know, especially as a parent. As a parent, it's very, very tough. But I think as soon as you accept, you're willing to advocate for that child, and you empower yourself, it becomes a much easier conversation.
It does.
Yeah.
And just other things we haven't discussed, but in terms of other medication, parents will often ask about, I think you did mention it though, alternative homeopathic.
Yes, alternative. Yes.
So, I mean, for me, my take is I'll talk about what I know and what has scientific evidence in what I have read.
Right.
What I don't know, as long as it doesn't interfere, for me, you can try it. You can let me know. But there are things like your omega 6s, your omega-3s, good for the brain.
Good
that
for the
will
brain.
say,
Yeah.
you know, take that. And then.
And also there was another one where when we went for one of those therapy discussions, they spoke about the gut a lot, you know, and the type of diet for the child.
Yeah.
You know, obviously less sugar.
Yeah, no,
you know,
definitely
because
less
there's this
sugar.
energy that needs to be released. But more grain, more nuts, more, you know, type of foods, you know. Does that?
So I don't really give advice on a lot of dietary things. The one thing that has been shown that it can make ADHD a little bit worse are artificial flavorings. So try not to buy
processed foods,
artificial flavors, like your juices that are not 100%, that are pink and yellow and green. If it doesn't come naturally in that color, maybe don't give it. But they've looked at different diets and they don't really make.
And do they say anything in the
difference.
research about dairy? Because I also was told to not give him cheese, like, you know.
As I said, I don't think diet is that critical.
Yeah,
so for me, it's whatever you're eating at home, as long as it's a healthy filling meal, it's okay. And also, because we're in the public sector, most of our parents can't afford to try and modify diets.
We understand that.
Yeah, you know. So no, it's not so much about the diet, but yes, try not the sugary foods.
Yeah,
artificial flavors.
Yes,
So stay away from those.
Okay.
Otherwise, eat everything.
Anything else that you can share with us, Doctor? Because I think obviously I can only ask based on what I know, based on what I've experienced. But you obviously have much more, you know. What else do you think is critical for us as parents or teachers out there? You know, if any of the teachers are watching, you know, what do you want to say to them? Because at home as a parent, I can be open-minded and do everything right, but if the school environment is not aligned, then it does create
problems. I think the one thing I would like people to know is that children with ADHD are amazing. Guys, they have so much in terms of talent. These are talented kids. I mean, if they're really into music, trust me, let them be into that music because they might take it somewhere. If they're into that sport, let them do that sport. They learn differently. They are the out-of-the-box thinkers. They'll solve problems not in the usual way. So if you identify a talent that your child has, nurture it. Nurture it. There are many famous people who have ADHD and who are doing well, who have learning disabilities, who are doing well. So one is empower yourself about ADHD, get as much information as you can, and each child is different. Don't paint them all the same color. Work on that one child, what works best for this child. And then the next child with ADHD, learn them too, and then work on them. But these are talented kids, man. They're so neurodiverse. They have so much to offer.
I like the neurodiverse term.
Yeah,
I'm actually going to start using it.
I love it. It's one of my favorite things that we're all just different. Our brains work differently. And unfortunately, the schooling system is one way designed. And our tests also meant for certain thinkers.
Heavy assessment-driven schools.
Exactly. These kids are amazing. They just need support. They need a diagnosis. Once they have the diagnosis, then we work on a treatment plan. And the treatment plan is not just medication. The treatment plan involves behavioral modification, environmental modification, parent training, child training as well. And they'll reach their full potential.
Sure.
And they will.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you so much. This was such an invaluable conversation. And thank you so much for making the time to come to the hot seat.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me. It wasn't as hot as I thought.
No, I always keep it mild. Don't worry. Guys, that was such an amazing conversation. Interesting conversation. ADHD, ADD, absolutely nothing wrong. It's a different way that the brain functions, and I think we as a society have normalized certain things, and we, you know, if people don't behave or learn in the way that we learn, we always think that there's something wrong. And right, I mean, Dr. Bongi made it very clear. It's a condition that can be treated, absolutely nothing wrong. Parents, you know, we need to obviously be more open-minded about it. If you do notice some of the symptoms that she's mentioned in your child, you know, consult a doctor, go to the nearest clinic, and yeah, and just really support your kids, and so that they become better adults. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. If you do have a question for the doctor, go ahead and put it in the comment section. I will ask her to answer your question. Thank you once again for tuning in. It's been a real thing. Hot Seat with Penzola.